On a cold winter night, the kind that turned the mountains into silhouettes of ice and shadow, the Blue Ridge Diner glowed faintly at the edge of a quiet highway. The flickering neon sign buzzed like an old heartbeat against the fog, its blue light stretching across the empty parking lot. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where the coffee was always lukewarm, and the regulars came not for the food but for the silence. On January 12, 2014, that silence would be broken forever. Lena Carter, a 28-year-old nurse from the nearby county hospital, had been working a long double shift. Her coworkers said she was exhausted but determined to drive home that night despite the heavy fog rolling in from the hills. Before leaving, she texted her roommate that she'd grab a quick coffee at the diner to stay awake on the road. It was a habit for her, a brief stop at the Blue Ridge Diner after long shifts. The waitress there, Martha Lane, always kept a pot brewing for late-night travelers. The diner's security camera captured Lena pulling into the lot at exactly 11:48 p.m. Her silver sedan came to a stop under the flickering sign, the headlights cutting through the mist for a moment before shutting off. She stepped out, wrapped in her hospital jacket, and walked through the diner's glass door. The little bell above it jingled softly. That was the last time anyone ever saw her alive. When the morning sun rose over Blue Ridge, the diner stood still and empty. The lights inside were off, the open sign still hanging in the window. Lena's car was parked in the same spot, untouched. The door was locked from the inside. To anyone passing by, it looked like a regular closed diner after a late night. But when a delivery truck stopped by at 7 a.m. and got no response, the driver called the police. Officers arrived to find a scene that felt both ordinary and unsettling. A cup of coffee sat on the counter, half finished, the steam long gone. Lena's purse rested beside it, her phone face down near the napkin holder. The stool she had been sitting on was pushed back, tilted slightly, as if she had stood up quickly. The jukebox in the corner still hummed with static, though no song played. The back door was locked too, and there was no sign of forced entry. It was as if Lena had simply vanished into thin air. Detectives questioned the staff who had worked that night. The cook, Henry Doyle, said he clocked out around 10:30 p.m., leaving Martha to close. Martha insisted she'd locked up around 11:30 and seen no one else after Henry left. Yet Lena's car, Lena's things, and that half-empty cup said otherwise. By evening, news of the missing nurse spread through the town. Locals stopped by the diner, whispering theories about what might have happened. Some said she'd been taken by someone she knew. Others swore they saw strange headlights near the woods that night. But beneath every rumor ran one haunting truth. The diner had been the last place Lena Carter was ever seen, and whatever had happened after her last call for coffee would leave Blue Ridge forever changed. The investigation into Lena Carter's disappearance began before the sun had fully risen over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Detectives and forensic teams filled the small diner, their boots squeaking on the black and white tile floor that still smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. The Blue Ridge Diner had always been a quiet, predictable place, a safe stop for travelers and locals alike. But that morning, it became something else entirely. Every surface, every object seemed to hold a secret. Police found the diner door locked from the inside, suggesting that whoever was last there either had a key or knew how to lock it from within. There was no sign of a break-in, no shattered windows, no forced latches. The cash register was untouched. The only thing missing was a single key to the back storage room. That detail bothered investigators more than anything else. The storage room was small and seldom used, filled mostly with cleaning supplies and old boxes. Yet when they opened it, the floor looked newly scrubbed, so clean it stood out from the rest of the diner. The smell of bleach was sharp, almost metallic, and near the drain at the center of the floor, faint reddish stains had seeped into the cracks between tiles. Detective Sarah Turner, who led the case, immediately sensed that whatever had happened to Lena hadn't been an accident. The footprints found near the counter and leading toward the back were smudged and incomplete, as if someone had tried to wipe them away. It was deliberate, careful, and rushed all at once. Still, there was no blood trail, no struggle visible to the eye. It looked as though Lena had stood up, taken a few steps, and disappeared into the air. Interviews with the diner staff only deepened the mystery. Henry Doyle, the cook, was known around town as a quiet man who rarely talked to anyone. He insisted he'd left at 10:30, an hour before Lena arrived, and had gone home to sleep. Martha Lane, the waitress, was the last person to admit being there that night. She said she cleaned up, turned off the jukebox, and left around 11:30, just before Lena was seen on camera entering the diner. But the timeline didn't fit. Martha's statement suggested the diner should have been locked and dark, yet Lena walked in minutes later to find lights on, coffee brewing, and the door unlocked. Detectives went over the security footage frame by frame. The front camera showed Lena entering, but the angle toward the back door cut out for 7 minutes before resuming with static. The timestamp blinked erratically, as though someone had tampered with it. It was enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to prove anything. As the days passed, the town's sense of unease grew heavier. Reporters arrived from nearby cities, cameras flashing against the diner's windows. Locals drove by slowly at night, hoping to see something the police might have missed. Some swore they saw a shadow move behind the blinds, long after the diner had been sealed off. Detective Turner's team collected every possible piece of evidence: the half-empty coffee cup, a single strand of hair found on the counter, the wiped footprints, but the puzzle refused to fit together. Lena Carter had walked into the Blue Ridge Diner at 11:48 p.m. Her car was still there, her belongings untouched. But somehow, without breaking a lock or leaving a sound, she had vanished. And in the lingering scent of bleach and the quiet hum of the jukebox, something dark seemed to hide, waiting to be uncovered. The search for Lena Carter stretched far beyond the diner's walls. Within days, police teams combed the woods, riverbanks, and abandoned farmhouses surrounding Blue Ridge. Flyers with her photo hung in grocery stores and on gas pumps, her smiling face becoming a haunting fixture of the town. Every lead seemed to fade as quickly as it appeared. There were no witnesses, no credit card activity, no calls made from her phone after 11:48 p.m. It was as if the night itself had swallowed her whole. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation began to lose its rhythm. Then, in early March, a snowplow driver clearing a remote forest road discovered something unusual: a scrap of blue fabric caught in the ice near an old hunting cabin. When police arrived, they found the cloth was part of a torn nurse's uniform. The cabin sat deep in the woods, miles from the main road, forgotten and half-collapsed under the weight of snow. Inside, dust and decay clung to the air. Empty cans, a rusted lantern, and old tools were scattered across the floor, but one thing stood out: a thermos with the Blue Ridge Diner logo printed on it, sitting beside a folded blanket stained with something dark. Investigators carefully examined the cabin. Beneath a loose floorboard, they found traces of blood, dried, faint, but still visible against the wood. DNA testing later confirmed what they feared: it belonged to Lena Carter. But there was more. Fingerprints lifted from the thermos, and a hunting knife found in the corner matched a man named Earl Henderson, a long-haul trucker who had stopped regularly at the diner. Earl was known to some in town as a drifter, a man who spoke little and often kept to himself. He had a record for minor assaults and a history of mental health issues, but nothing that had ever connected him to something like this. When police searched Earl's home, they found his truck parked in the driveway, keys still in the ignition, and the house left as though he had stepped out for a moment and never returned. His last fuel purchase was recorded the same night Lena disappeared. Detectives believed he might have lured her away from the diner, but how remained unclear. There was no evidence of a struggle inside the diner, no sign she had left willingly. The missing key to the back storage room suddenly took on new weight. It was the kind of key employees carried, but the thought that Earl could have obtained one seemed impossible. Rumors began to swirl around Blue Ridge. Some claimed Earl and Lena had known each other in secret. Others whispered that Martha, the waitress, had been close to Earl and might have helped him. Theories filled the silence that evidence could not. As spring arrived, the investigation grew colder. The cabin was searched again and again, but nothing new emerged. The case files grew thick, but the answers did not. It was as though the forest had buried its secrets beneath the snow. Lena Carter was officially declared missing, presumed dead, and Earl Henderson was marked as the prime suspect, though he, too, had vanished without a trace. The Blue Ridge Diner reopened briefly that summer, its stools polished and its counters wiped clean, but few ever sat there again. The hum of the jukebox, once comforting, now felt like an echo of something unfinished. And deep in the woods, the wind that passed through the empty cabin seemed to carry the question no one could answer. What really happened after Lena's last call at the Blue Ridge Diner? 2 years passed before the mystery of Lena Carter's disappearance stirred again. The Blue Ridge Diner had long been shuttered, its neon sign dark, its windows gathering dust and dead leaves. The town had learned to live with the silence, though no one ever forgot. Then, one gray afternoon in late 2016, construction workers digging near an abandoned railway line made a discovery that tore open the quiet once more. Beneath a patch of frozen soil, buried in a shallow pit, was an old chest freezer sealed tightly with rusted wire. It was heavy, the metal corroded, and when pried open, the stench of decay escaped like a secret finally forced into daylight. Inside were human remains wrapped in layers of plastic and cloth. At first, no one could be certain whose they were, but a small, corroded nurse's badge was pinned to the fabric. Lena Carter's name still faintly visible through the grime. The forensic team worked carefully through the evidence, and DNA tests soon confirmed it was indeed her. Yet what shocked investigators even more was what else they found. A man's wallet, partially destroyed but still legible enough to reveal the name Earl Henderson. The prime suspect in Lena's disappearance had been buried beside her. Detective Sarah Turner, who had never stopped working the case, returned to Blue Ridge to oversee the new investigation. The discovery changed everything. The presence of 2 bodies told a story no one had expected. If Earl was dead too, then who had buried them? And how had both vanished on the same night? Among the items found inside the freezer was something small but crucial, a diner receipt dated several hours after Lena and Earl were both last seen alive. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. The transaction was made using an employee code that belonged to Martha Lane. Turner's suspicion reignited. Martha had moved away not long after the diner closed, living quietly in another county under her maiden name. When police brought her in for questioning, she appeared calm at first, insisting she knew nothing beyond what she had already told them years ago. But when confronted with the receipt, her composure broke. The story she had hidden for years began to unravel. Martha confessed that Earl Henderson had returned to the diner that night after closing. She had agreed to meet him, desperate for money and aware that the diner's safe often held several $100s from weekend business. Earl had proposed they take the cash and make it look like a break-in. She agreed, but neither of them knew that Lena, finishing her shift late at the hospital, would stop by for coffee at that very moment. Lena's unexpected arrival turned their plan into chaos. She recognized Earl and grew suspicious when she saw the back door open. A confrontation broke out, and in the struggle, Earl struck her. Panic followed. Martha claimed it wasn't meant to happen, that she and Earl both froze when they realized what they'd done. In fear of being caught, they hid Lena's body in the trunk of Earl's truck and drove toward the woods. But guilt and paranoia consumed them. They began to argue violently, and according to Martha's account, Earl tried to turn on her before she fought back. She left him bleeding near the old railway tracks and buried both bodies in the freezer Earl had once used in his cabin. The confession was enough to close the case, but it didn't erase the unease that lingered over Blue Ridge. The diner was condemned soon after, left to crumble in silence. For many, the discovery only deepened the town's sorrow, proving that the answers they had waited years to find were darker than anyone had imagined. When the truth finally surfaced, it was far from the kind of justice anyone in Blue Ridge had hoped for. Martha Lane's confession tied every loose end together, yet left behind a lingering unease that no sentence could erase. She admitted to cleaning the diner that night after returning from the woods, scrubbing the floor until her hands burned and pouring bleach down the drain to hide the blood that had pooled there. Every movement she made was methodical, calculated, born out of fear. She wiped the counter, reset the clocking system, and even brewed a fresh pot of coffee before locking the door behind her, trying to make the diner look untouched, as though nothing tragic had ever happened. The receipt found in the freezer, dated hours after both deaths, was her final act of manipulation. She had gone back to the diner in the early morning to leave behind a false trail, one that would confuse investigators and stretch the timeline. It worked. For years, no one suspected her. She watched the investigation unfold from afar, blending into another small town under a new name. But guilt has a way of echoing louder than silence. Even after moving away, she couldn't escape the faint hum of the jukebox that played in her dreams, or the image of Lena's car parked under the flickering blue light. When her trial began, the courtroom was filled with people who had once trusted her. She pled guilty to manslaughter and concealment of evidence, avoiding a death sentence in exchange for a full confession. The judge's gavel echoed like thunder when he sentenced her to 12 years in prison. For the families, there was no sense of closure, only the heavy realization that Lena's final moments had been ordinary until they weren't. Detective Sarah Turner attended every hearing, her face as still as the diner's empty windows. To her, Martha's confession was both a victory and a wound. It solved the mystery, but not the emotion behind it. What haunted her most wasn't the brutality of the crime, but the ordinariness of the setting. A simple diner on a quiet road, where life and death had crossed paths between refilled coffee cups and cheap neon lights. After Martha's sentencing, the Blue Ridge Diner was left to rot. The county eventually boarded up the doors, but the building refused to fade from memory. Truckers passing at night still claimed to see its sign flicker for a few seconds before going dark again. Some said they spotted a figure inside, a woman sitting alone at the counter, head bowed, a coffee cup steaming before her. Whether it was imagination or something else, no one could say for sure. Years later, when the diner was finally demolished, the workers found one last trace of its past, a cracked tile near the drain that still carried a faint reddish tint beneath the bleach stains. It was the only thing that hadn't been scrubbed clean. To the people of Blue Ridge, it was a reminder that truth never really disappears. It just waits for the right moment to surface. And so, the legend of the Blue Ridge Diner lived on. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning travelers not to stop there if they ever saw the lights glowing through the fog. They called it the Last Call, a name born from a night Lena Carter walked into the diner for a final cup of coffee and never walked out again.